The heartbreaking killed-in-action story of Sergeant David Enzbrenner. The knock. The chipped mug felt warm in Mary Enzbrenner's hands, a small comfort against the late autumn chill seeping through the window panes. Outside, the Tuesday afternoon was settling into that familiar, quiet rhythm, the distant drone of a lawnmower, the occasional car passing on Maple Street, the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the pavement. Lucy, their 4-year-old force of nature, was finally down for her nap, leaving the house wrapped in a rare, precious silence. Mary sank deeper into the worn armchair, David's favorite, and closed her eyes, letting the weak sunlight warm her face. She was just starting to drift, thinking about dinner, maybe pasta tonight, when the sound came. Knock. 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 Not the friendly rap of a neighbor dropping off mail, nor the hurried tap of a delivery driver. This was different. Measured. Formal. Heavy. Mary's eyes snapped open. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way up her spine. She set the mug down on the coaster David had made in high school shop class, its surface scarred with rings from countless cups of coffee. Another knock, identical to the first, echoed through the quiet house. She rose, her legs feeling strangely stiff. As she walked to the front door, her heart began a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a panicked bird trapped in a cage. Through the peephole, her breath caught. 2 figures stood on her porch, silhouetted against the pale afternoon sky. Men. In uniform. Army dress greens, sharp creases, faces etched with a practiced, somber gravity she recognized instantly, viscerally, from news reports and whispered stories among other military wives. No. The word formed silently in her mind, a desperate plea. Not us. Not David. Please, God, no. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, the cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat flooding her body. She pulled the door open, the hinges groaning softly. The taller of the 2 men, a chaplain with silver oak leaves glinting on his shoulders, met her gaze. His eyes were kind, filled with a sorrow that felt ancient and immediate. Beside him, a master sergeant stood ramrod straight, his expression carefully neutral, holding a folded document. Mrs. Mary Enzbrenner, the chaplain asked, his voice low and steady, though it seemed to reach her across an immense distance. Mary could only nod, her throat tight, words impossible. The world seemed to tilt, the edges blurring. The rustling leaves suddenly sounded deafening, the sunlight harsh and accusing. I am Chaplain Miller, he continued, his gaze unwavering, and this is Master Sergeant Thorne. May we come in? She stepped back numbly, a puppet whose strings had been cut. They entered the small foyer, their polished shoes silent on the worn rug. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken finality. Mary wrapped her arms around herself, a subconscious shield against the blow she knew was coming. Master Sergeant Thorne cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Enzbrenner, he began, his voice formal, reciting words that felt both rehearsed and impossibly cruel. The Secretary of the Army has asked me to express his deep regret. Mary didn't hear the rest of the official sentence. The words dissolved into a roaring sound in her ears, the sound of her world collapsing. Killed in action. Afghanistan, today. Fragments pierced through the noise, sharp and lethal. David. Killed. The word hung in the air, obscene, unbelievable. Her knees buckled. The chaplain moved quickly, guiding her back to the armchair she had just left, the one that still held the faint scent of David's aftershave and the indentation of his body. She sank into it, her hands covering her face, but she couldn't cry. Not yet. The shock was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. David. Her David. The boy she'd met at the county fair, who'd charmed her with a goofy grin and won her a stuffed bear she still kept on their dresser. The man who held her tight during thunderstorms, who could fix anything with duct tape and sheer willpower, who made terrible pancakes but sang silly songs doing it. The soldier who left pieces of his heart at home every time he deployed, but whose sense of duty burned so bright. The father who adored his little girl, whose laughter echoed in these rooms. Gone. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock, each tick an agonizing reminder of time marching forward into a future she couldn't comprehend. A future without him. Upstairs, a small whimper drifted down, Lucy stirring from her nap. The sound shattered the dam. A low sob escaped Mary's lips, then another, tearing through the fragile composure she hadn't known she possessed. The chaplain knelt beside her, offering quiet words of comfort that couldn't possibly reach the abyss that had just opened beneath her feet. The knock had come. And in the space of a few measured heartbeats and recited words, everything had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold so profound it felt like it would freeze her soul. The life they had built, the future they had dreamed of, lay shattered around her feet, reduced to the unbearable weight of a folded flag yet to come, and the devastating reality of raising their daughter alone in the echoing silence of his absence. The storm had arrived. Before the storm. The late afternoon sun, the color of honey, slanted through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, golden sprites. It painted stripes across the plush rug where Sergeant David Enzbrenner lay sprawled on his stomach, his uniform shed for faded jeans and a worn t-shirt. Beside him, absorbed in a world of towering plastic blocks and precarious architectural ambitions, sat Lucy. Her bright pink overalls were slightly askew, her brow furrowed in concentration that mirrored her father's when he was cleaning his rifle, though her objective was far less grim. A cascade of blonde curls, fine as silk, fell across her face as she carefully placed a blue block atop a wobbly red one. Almost. Daddy, look, she squealed, her voice pure, unfiltered joy. David lifted his head, propping his chin on his hands. A slow, easy smile spread across his face, erasing the lines of tension that sometimes lingered around his eyes after long weeks away. I see it, sweet pea. That's the tallest tower ever built on Maple Street. Maybe even in the whole world. Lucy giggled, a sound like wind chimes. Nah, silly daddy. The Empire State Building is taller. She pronounced the name carefully, a recent addition to her vocabulary gleaned from a picture book. Ah, you got me there, David conceded, reaching out to gently tuck a stray curl behind her ear. His touch was surprisingly delicate for hands more accustomed to the rough grip of equipment and the recoil of a weapon. But this one's built with more love. And definitely more drool. He winked, gesturing at a damp patch on a yellow block where Lucy had apparently tested its structural integrity with her mouth. She swatted playfully at his hand. You, Daddy. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that filled the room. This was his sanctuary. Not the barracks, not the FOB, not the tense silence of patrol. This. The scent of fabric softener clinging to Lucy's clothes, the familiar creak of the floorboards overhead as Mary moved around in the kitchen, the way the sunlight pooled on the rug. These were the moments that fueled him, the memories he carried into the harsh terrain of Afghanistan like talismans against the fear and the loneliness. He watched Lucy add another block, her small tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Her seriousness was comical, adorable. He saw so much of Mary in her, the determined set of her jaw, the spark of intelligence in her bright blue eyes. And maybe, he hoped, a little bit of himself too, the perseverance, the quiet strength. He rolled onto his back, stretching languidly. Lucy, taking this as an invitation, immediately abandoned her tower and scrambled onto his chest, collapsing in a heap of giggles and flailing limbs. Oof. Ambush. David grunted, feigning injury. He wrapped his arms around her small frame, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair. It smelled like baby shampoo and sunshine. He held her tightly, breathing her in, trying to memorize the feeling, the weight of her, the absolute rightness of having her in his arms. These moments felt both infinite and fleeting. He knew the clock was always ticking down to his next departure. Each homecoming, each period of leave, was a precious bubble of normalcy suspended in the turbulent reality of his chosen profession. He didn't dwell on the danger when he was here, he couldn't afford to. Here, he was just Daddy. He was just David, Mary's husband. The guy who left his socks on the floor and always burned the toast. He closed his eyes, Lucy's rhythmic breathing a soothing cadence against his chest. The distant clatter of pans from the kitchen, Mary humming softly off-key, it was the soundtrack of his peace. This was what he fought for. Not abstract concepts or political lines drawn on a map, but this. This messy, imperfect, beautiful life. The warmth of his daughter in his arms, the golden light filling the room, the quiet certainty of belonging. A perfect, fragile moment suspended in time, before the storm gathered on a horizon he couldn't yet see. 3. The final mission. Dust choked the air, thick and gritty, tasting of ancient earth and diesel fumes. The Afghan sun beat down relentlessly, baking the barren terrain into a shimmering mirage. Sergeant David Enzbrenner scanned the ridgeline, his eyes narrowed against the glare, sweat tracing clean paths through the grime on his temples. His M4 felt like a familiar extension of his arm, heavy and solid. Today's mission was routine, if anything in this godforsaken valley could be called routine. A patrol through a village suspected of harboring insurgents, a presence patrol, meant to show force and gather intel. Simple on paper, potentially lethal in practice. David tapped his radio handset. Alpha 1, this is actual. Status? Static crackled, then the calm voice of his point man, Corporal Evans. Actual, Alpha 1. Clear ahead. Village looks quiet. Too quiet, maybe. David grunted in acknowledgement. Copy that, 1. Eyes sharp. Everyone, maintain spacing. He glanced back at his squad, Miller, Diaz, young PFC Riley on his first deployment, looking pale beneath his helmet but holding steady. Good men. His men. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavier than his pack. Get them in, get them out. That was always the primary objective. They moved with practiced efficiency, boots crunching softly on the loose gravel path leading into the cluster of mud brick compounds. The silence Evans noted was unnerving. No children playing, no farmers in the sparse fields, not even the usual stray dogs barking at their approach. The air hung thick with unspoken tension, prickling the back of David's neck. He keyed his mic again. All elements, be advised, potential ambush site. Look for fighting positions, rooftop observers. He scanned the flat roofs, the dark, empty doorways. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. He thought fleetingly of Mary's worried frown, Lucy's bright giggle. He pushed the images away, compartmentalizing. Focus. Stay sharp. They were halfway through the village center, a small, dusty square with a dry well, when the world erupted. The crack of sniper fire echoed first, sharp and distinct, kicking up dust near Diaz's feet. At nearly the same instant, the staccato rattle of AK-47s opened up from multiple directions, rooftops, alleyways. Ambush. Textbook L-shape. Contact front. Contact right. David yelled, instinct taking over. Get down. Return fire. His men reacted instantly, dropping behind the low walls of the well, the meager cover offered by crumbling building corners. Rounds snapped overhead, whizzing past with deadly intent. Dust and debris flew as bullets impacted the mud bricks around them. David sighted down his rifle, identifying a muzzle flash from a second-story window. He squeezed off a controlled burst, saw plaster explode near the opening. Miller, Diaz, suppress that window. Riley, watch our 6. He saw Riley, eyes wide but hands steady, covering the rear approach. Good kid. David risked a quick glance. They were pinned down, exposed in the square. They needed to break contact or gain fire superiority. Fast. Evans, can you spot the sniper? David shouted over the din. Negative, Sarge. Too much incoming. Another burst of fire stitched across the ground near David. He ducked lower, fragments stinging his cheek. He saw Diaz reloading, Miller laying down suppressing fire. They were holding their own, but they couldn't stay here. We need to move. David yelled. Bound back to the south entrance. Diaz, you have the point. On my command. Covering fire. He rose slightly, laying down a heavy stream of fire at the most active enemy position on the right flank, giving Diaz the precious seconds needed to pull back. Go. 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 Diaz scrambled back, firing as he moved. Miller followed. David kept firing, covering their retreat, keenly aware of his own exposed position. Just Riley and him left in the square. Riley, move. David commanded, reloading swiftly. Riley hesitated for a fraction of a second, then scrambled back to the relative safety of the alleyway Diaz and Miller had reached. David poured fire at the rooftops, drawing their attention. Just a few more seconds, he thought. Get the kid clear. He saw Riley make it, turning to provide cover for him. It was David's turn. He pushed off the ground, ready to sprint back, his muscles coiled. Then came a sound unlike the sharp crack of rifles, a dull thump, followed by a whistling shriek that seemed to suck the air out of the square. RPG. He didn't even have time to shout a warning. There was a blinding flash, an earth-shattering roar that dwarfed the gunfire, and an immense wave of pressure slammed into him, lifting him off his feet. Pain, white-hot and absolute, exploded through his body. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring the breath from his lungs. The sounds of the firefight dimmed, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Dust rained down, settling over him like a shroud. He tried to move, but his limbs wouldn't respond. He looked down. Chaos. Blood. Too much blood. Through the haze, he saw blurred figures, Miller, Diaz, running to him, their mouths moving, shouting words he couldn't hear over the ringing. He tried to focus, tried to say something, but only a faint gasp escaped his lips. The harsh sunlight seemed to dim. The edges of his vision darkened. The last thing he saw was the frantic, horrified face of young Riley leaning over him. Then, silence. A sudden, profound stillness amidst the lingering echoes of battle. Sergeant David Enzbrenner was gone. 4 brothers in arms. The harsh fluorescent lights of the makeshift briefing room at FOB Walton hummed, casting a sterile glow on the 4 figures slumped around a metal table littered with empty ration packs and smudged maps. The air, usually thick with coarse jokes, complaints about the chow, or the tense energy before a mission, was heavy with a suffocating silence. Outside, the routine sounds of the base, generators humming, radios crackling, boots on gravel, continued, oblivious to the hole ripped in the fabric of Alpha Squad. Corporal Evans stared blankly at the tabletop, tracing the faded outline of a coffee stain with a grimy finger. Diaz sat with his head in his hands, shoulders slumped. Miller, usually the most stoic, had his eyes closed, his jaw tight. And PFC Riley, his face still pale and streaked with dirt, fidgeted nervously, his gaze darting between the others, unable to land anywhere for long. They had been debriefed, patched up where needed, but the real wounds weren't visible. It was Evans who finally broke the silence, his voice rough. He never hesitated. Not once. Diaz looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Saw that RPG launch, screamed a warning, but... He trailed off, shaking his head, the memory too raw. It wasn't your fault, Diaz, Miller said quietly, his voice flat. No one could have stopped that. Riley flinched, drawing his knees up tighter. He pushed me back, he whispered, the words barely audible. He told me to move, covered me. If I hadn't hesitated, if I'd been faster. Stop right there, kid, Evans cut him off, his tone firm but not unkind. He leaned forward, meeting Riley's haunted gaze. That's not on you. That was Sarge. That's who he was. He saw you clear, then he moved. Leader eats last, leader covers the withdrawal. Standard procedure for him. Miller nodded, rubbing his temples. Enzbrenner always said it. Take the step that's right in front of you. Worry about the next one when you get there. He took his step, covering you. That was his job, Riley. Protecting his men. Take the step that's right in front of you. The phrase hung in the air. David had said it often. On grueling marches when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, during tense briefings before uncertain patrols, even back in garrison when facing tedious tasks. It was his way of breaking down the impossible, of focusing on the immediate, controllable action. Do the next right thing. It was how he led. How he lived. Damn it, Diaz muttered, slamming a fist softly on the table, the sound startling in the quiet room. He was supposed to make it home. Lucy's birthday, he had that stupid stuffed donkey he won at the bazaar hidden in his locker for her. The mention of David's daughter deepened the pall. They all knew how much he adored Lucy, how he carried her crayon drawings tucked inside his helmet liner, how his voice changed when he spoke of her and Mary. We gotta make sure they're okay, Evans said, looking around the table, his gaze finding agreement in the other's eyes. Whatever they need. We owe him that. Damn right we do, Miller affirmed. A silent understanding passed between them, a heavy promise forged in shared grief and loyalty. They had lost their sergeant, their leader, their brother. The guilt gnawed at them, the what-ifs, the fractions of seconds, the feeling of having survived when he hadn't. But beneath the guilt was a fierce resolve. They would carry on, not just out of necessity, but Enzbrenner would have expected it. They would take the next step, just like he taught them. They would watch each other's six. And they would never forget the man who had taken his final step protecting them. The weight of his absence was immense, but so was the legacy he left behind in the hearts of the men he led. Mary's grief. The days blurred into a gray, monotonous stretch of sympathetic faces, casseroles left on the doorstep, and the constant, aching hollowness in Mary's chest. The house felt too big, too quiet, filled with the ghosts of laughter and routine. David's boots still sat by the back door, his coffee mug remained on the coaster where she'd left it, his scent lingered faintly on the pillow beside hers. Each small reminder was a fresh stab of pain. Then came the funeral. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks as she stood by the graveside, clutching Lucy's small hand tightly. The sharp crack of the rifle salute echoed across the cemetery, making Lucy jump. Mary pulled her closer, shielding her daughter with her body, though she felt utterly exposed herself. Soldiers in dress uniform moved with solemn precision. The mournful notes of taps hung heavy in the air, each note a tear shed by an invisible mourner. She watched numbly as they folded the American flag covering David's casket, crisp, deliberate folds transforming the broad banner into a tight, blue triangle studded with stars. Master Sergeant Thorne, his face etched with a sorrow that seemed genuine beneath the military bearing, knelt before her. He presented the flag, his voice low and thick with emotion. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. Mary's hands trembled as she accepted the impossible weight of it. This triangle of cloth. This was what was left. This, and memories that felt increasingly fragile, like old photographs threatening to fade. She held the flag tight against her chest, burying her face in its starched surface, finally letting the tears flow freely, oblivious to the crowd, the ceremony, everything but the crushing finality it represented. Back home, the casseroles eventually stopped arriving. The sympathetic visitors dwindled. The world, indifferent to her private agony, spun on. Mary was left alone in the echoing silence, facing the difficult reality of raising Lucy by herself. Nights were the hardest. Lying in the queen-sized bed that now felt like a vast, empty continent, she'd reach for David out of habit, her hand meeting only cold sheets. Sleep offered little refuge, often bringing vivid dreams of him, laughing, holding her, only to have her wake with a gasp to the stark, unchanging reality of his absence. Lucy, too young to grasp the permanence of death, kept asking when Daddy was coming home from his long trip. Each innocent question was a fresh twist of the knife in Mary's heart. How could she explain forever to a 4-year-old? How could she manage her own suffocating grief trying to be the stable anchor her daughter desperately needed? Some days, just getting out of bed felt like scaling a mountain. The simple act of making breakfast, packing a lunchbox, reading a bedtime story, tasks once shared or performed against the backdrop of David's presence, now felt monumentally difficult, each one a reminder of the void he left. She found herself talking to him sometimes, whispering into the empty air in the kitchen, arguing with his picture on the mantelpiece, sobbing into his old sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of him. Her grief wasn't loud or dramatic, it was a quiet, relentless erosion. It was the sudden inability to breathe when a song they loved came on the radio, the wave of nausea seeing a young family laughing in the park, the paralyzing fear of the future stretching out before her, a single path where there used to be two. She packed his uniforms away in a box, with his medals, some photographs, and a handful of letters he'd sent from overseas. She couldn't bear to look at them yet, but she couldn't bring herself to get rid of them either. She sealed the box carefully and carried it up the rickety attic stairs, placing it in a dusty corner, a time capsule of a life that was brutally cut short. She closed the attic door, leaving the tangible pieces of Sergeant David Enzbrenner in the darkness, unaware that years later, that same box would become a beacon for the little girl whose hand she now held so tightly. The weight of his loss was hers alone to carry now, a private burden shielded from the world, heavier than any folded flag. 6. Lucy's search. The attic air was thick with the scent of dust, aging paper, and forgotten things. Sunlight streamed through a single grimy window, illuminating swirling particles and casting long shadows from stacks of boxes and shrouded furniture. 17-year-old Lucy Enzbrenner coughed softly, waving a hand in front of her face. She wasn't entirely sure what had drawn her up here on this rainy Saturday afternoon. A vague restlessness, perhaps. A feeling of searching for something she couldn't name. High school was winding down, college applications loomed, and the inevitable questions about her future felt heavy and confusing. Everyone seemed to know their path, but hers felt shrouded in fog. She knew the stories, of course. Her mom, Mary, had always spoken openly, if sadly, about her father, Sergeant David Enzbrenner. The town remembered him as a hero. There was a small plaque near the VFW hall. But to Lucy, he was more myth than man, a faded photograph on the mantelpiece, a folded flag in a display case downstairs, a brave soldier lost long ago. An absence shaped like a father. She ran her hand over a dusty trunk, then moved deeper into the attic's cluttered space. Her gaze landed on a sturdy cardboard box tucked away in a far corner, marked simply with David, in her mother's familiar handwriting. She'd seen it before, years ago, but had never felt compelled to open it. Today was different. With a strange mix of trepidation and determination, Lucy knelt beside the box. The tape sealing it was old and brittle, yielding easily under her fingers. She lifted the flaps. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay the tangible remnants of her father's life. A folded dress green uniform, the fabric still crisp, smelling faintly of mothballs and something else, something uniquely him that defied description. Medals glinting dully, a purple heart, a bronze star. Dog tags, cool metal against her fingertips. A few creased photographs, David grinning goofily with his arm around a much younger Mary, David in dusty fatigues, surrounded by serious-looking men who must have been his squad, David holding her, a tiny infant wrapped in a pink blanket, his face alight with fierce, tender love. Lucy traced the outline of his face in the photo, a lump forming in her throat. This was him. Not the myth, not the hero plaque, but a young man, a husband, a father. Her father. Beneath the uniform, she found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Most were addressed to her mom, filled with reassurances, snippets of daily life overseas carefully sanitized for worried eyes, and declarations of love that made Lucy blush and ache simultaneously. But tucked at the bottom was a thicker envelope, slightly crumpled, addressed simply to Lucy. Her breath caught. Her name. Written in his hand, strong, slightly slanted handwriting she recognized from notes scrawled on the backs of photos. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He had written to her. With trembling fingers, she carefully slid the letter out. It wasn't sealed. It looked like he'd written it over time, maybe during rare quiet moments between patrols. She unfolded the pages, the paper soft and worn. "My dearest Lucy," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I hope with all my heart this letter stays tucked away, unread, until I can give it to you myself when you're much, much older. But war is unpredictable, sweetheart, and there are things I need you to know, just in case." Tears blurred Lucy's vision, but she blinked them back fiercely, desperate to absorb every word. He wrote about simple things, how much he missed her bedtime stories, her funny questions, the way she scrunched up her nose when she was concentrating. He told her how proud he was, even then, of the smart, brave little girl she was becoming. "Life is going to throw challenges at you, sweet pea," he wrote. "Things won't always be easy or fair. There will be times you feel lost or scared. When that happens, I want you to remember something I try to live by: just take the step that's right in front of you. Focus on doing the next right thing, however small it seems. You don't have to see the whole path, just the next footstep. Be brave enough to take it." His words resonated deep within her, echoing the vague advice her mom sometimes offered, but hearing it directly from him, in his voice carried across the years on paper, felt different. It felt like guidance. Like permission to not have all the answers. He wrote about his love for her mother, urging Lucy to take care of her. He wrote about his belief in service, not as something inherently glorious, but as a responsibility to protect the things that matter: family, home, the chance for people like her to grow up safe. There was no bitterness, no call for vengeance, only a profound sense of duty and an overwhelming love for the life he had left behind. "Know that I love you more than words can say," the letter concluded. "You were my brightest star, Lucy Bug. Live a full, happy life. Be kind. Be strong. Find your purpose. Whatever you choose to do, make me proud. All my love, forever. Daddy." Lucy sat there for a long time next to the dust motes, the letter clutched in her hand, tears streaming silently down her face. Grief, sharp and fresh even with the passing years, washed over her. But mingled with the sorrow was something else, a profound sense of connection. She wasn't just the daughter of a fallen hero anymore. She was the daughter of David Enzbrenner, the man who wrote this letter, the man who believed in taking the next right step, the man who loved her unconditionally. In the quiet solitude of the attic, surrounded by the echoes of his life, Lucy finally felt like she was beginning to find him. And in doing so, she was starting to find herself. 7. The legacy. The decision didn't come like a lightning strike, but like the slow, steady dawn after a long night. In the months following her discovery in the attic, Lucy carried her father's letter everywhere, its worn pages becoming a quiet source of strength. She reread his words often, absorbing their simple wisdom: take the step that's right in front of you. Talking with her mother, who saw the change in her, a newfound sense of direction replacing the earlier uncertainty, Lucy explained it wasn't about vengeance for a father she barely remembered, nor was it blind patriotism or a sense of familial obligation. It was about purpose. Her father hadn't glorified war, he had believed in service, in protecting the possibility of peace, in doing the hard work that needed to be done. He believed in taking responsibility for the step right in front of him. That resonated with Lucy more deeply than any heroic war story ever could. The military wasn't the only way to serve, she knew, but for her, standing where she was, it felt like the next right step. It felt like hers. Mary watched her daughter, saw the quiet determination in her eyes, so much like David's, and understood. There was fear, yes, the bone-deep fear only a Gold Star parent could know, but there was immense pride too. Years later, the parade ground shimmered under a bright, cloudless sky. Rows of newly commissioned officers stood ramrod straight in their dress uniforms, the culmination of months of intense training, discipline, and self-discovery. Second Lieutenant Lucy Enzbrenner stood with them, her posture erect, her gaze steady, her blonde hair pinned neatly beneath her service cap. Mary watched from the stands, clutching a tissue, her heart swelling with a complex mix of pride, anxiety, and poignant memory. Beside her sat Corporal Evans and Sergeant Diaz, older now, lines etched on their faces, but their presence a solid, unwavering show of support, a promise kept across the years. As the top graduate, Lucy was called upon to give the commencement address. She walked confidently to the podium, the polished wood cool beneath her fingertips. She took a deep breath, surveying the sea of faces, her fellow graduates, proud families, seasoned officers. Tucked securely in the inner pocket of her uniform jacket, she could feel the familiar worn edges of her father's letter. Commandant, distinguished guests, fellow officers, family, and friends, she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the field. Today marks not an end, but a beginning. We stand here forged by challenge, prepared for responsibility, committed to service. She spoke of the grueling training, the bonds forged in shared hardship, the meaning of leadership. Then, her voice softened slightly. Many of us stand here today inspired by those who served before us, she continued. For me, that inspiration comes from a man I barely knew, yet whose legacy has shaped my life, my father, Sergeant David Enzbrenner. A quiet ripple went through the crowd, many knew the name, the local hero story. He was killed in action in Afghanistan when I was 4, Lucy stated, her voice steady, holding Mary's gaze in the stands for a fleeting moment. For years, he was a photograph, a story, a folded flag. But then, I found a letter he wrote to me, a letter he hoped I would never have to read. She paused, reaching into her pocket and carefully unfolding the worn pages. She didn't read directly from it, but held it as if drawing strength from the paper itself. He didn't write about glory or enemies, she said. He wrote about love for his family, belief in his country, and the importance of facing challenges head-on. He left me with a simple piece of advice, advice that carried me through difficult times, advice that guided me here today: take the step that's right in front of you. Focus on doing the next right thing, however small it seems. Be brave enough to take it. She looked out at her fellow graduates. That is the core of service, isn't it? Not necessarily seeing the grand design, but having the courage and integrity to take the next right step. To do the job that needs doing. To uphold our values, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. My father served with purpose, Lucy finished, her voice ringing with conviction. He hoped for a world where his daughter could live a full, happy, and safe life. My service, our service, is not driven by the ghosts of the past, but by the hope for a better future. It's about taking our steps, the right steps, to honor the sacrifices made and to build something lasting. She refolded the letter carefully, placing it back in her pocket. Standing tall in her uniform, the sunlight glinting off the gold bar on her shoulder, Lucy Enzbrenner was no longer just the daughter of a fallen soldier searching for answers. She had taken the step that was right in front of her. She had found her father's legacy not in the attic dust or on a memorial plaque, but burning brightly within herself. She had found her purpose. The circle was complete.